Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Today, we're tackling a question that's both timely and honestly kind of daunting. Can religious teachings actually offer a path to world peace?
Big question.
Huge GE, and we're looking at it specifically through the lens of Islam.
Right, we're diving into a book called The Quran and World Peace by Dr. Israr Ahmad. He was an Islamic scholar who really emphasized making those ancient teachings relevant to the modern world.
Exactly. The book was originally published in Urdu way back in 1980, and then it was translated into English in 2011. And what really struck me is how Dr. Ahmad approaches peace on all these different levels. He talks about personal peace, societal peace, and even global peace. It's pretty ambitious.
It is, but he breaks it down in a way that makes it feel achievable, like it's
Yeah.
something we can actually work towards.
Yeah, it's not just some pie in the sky idea.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in. Dr. Ahmad starts by talking about the importance of inner peace, something I think we all crave, right?
Absolutely. That sense of calm, of being centered. We all want that.
Yeah, totally. And he uses this beautiful word, iman. It means having a really strong, unwavering religious belief.
And he sees that as the key, the foundation to unlocking that serenity and tranquility within ourselves. Like it's the starting point.
And there's this amazing verse from the Quran that he quotes to really drive this point home. Surah Ra'd, verse 28, it says, "Verily, in the remembrance of God do hearts find peace and satisfaction."
Powerful, right? And what I find fascinating is how Dr. Ahmad connects this feeling of peace to a sense of security. Like when you have that strong belief, you're less likely to be swayed by anxiety or fear. It gives you this inner strength.
It makes you think, right? Have you ever experienced that kind of peace through faith? I mean, for me personally, when I feel connected to something larger than myself, there's definitely a kind of calm that comes over me. It's hard to explain, but it's powerful.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's that sense of grounding, of knowing you're not alone in the universe. And that's exactly what Dr. Ahmad is getting at. He sees this belief in Allah as this anchor, a source of strength that allows you to face challenges without being completely overwhelmed by them. But he doesn't just stop there. He takes it a step further.
Oh.
Yeah. He asks how this individual peace, this internal transformation, can actually translate to a more peaceful world.
Ah, that's the million-dollar question. How do you go from inner peace to world peace?
Right. And this is where he brings in the idea of belief in the hereafter.
Okay, so how does that fit in?
Well, he argues that a true and sincere belief in Allah, including believing in what comes after this life, influences how we behave in this life.
It's like a moral compass guiding our actions.
Exactly. He's saying it discourages us from doing wrong
Hmm.
because we're aware of the consequences, not just in this world, but in the next. And that naturally leads to more peaceful interactions with others.
So it's like that inner peace kind of radiates outwards.
Exactly. He describes it as a ripple effect, like when you're at peace with yourself, it shows in how you treat others. It affects how you approach conflicts, how you respond to challenges.
I love that image of the ripple effect. Okay, so we've talked about personal peace, but does Dr. Ahmad see a link to a broader societal peace within Islam?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, he breaks down peace on three distinct levels: individual, socio-political, and world peace.
Okay, so let's dive into that second level, socio-political peace. What are the specifics? What does the Quran actually say about what makes a society peaceful?
Well, there are some really clear principles outlined in the Quran that Dr. Ahmad highlights, things like righteousness, piety, fairness, and justice. It's all about establishing a system where these things are woven into the very fabric of everyday life, not just ideals, but actual practices.
That makes sense. Are there any examples from the Quran that really illustrate this idea of socio-political peace in action?
Oh, yeah. One that Dr. Ahmad points to is the emphasis on salam.
You mean the traditional Muslim greeting?
Exactly. It's not just a casual hello. It's a way of invoking peace and well-being for the entire community. And you see this emphasis in the Prophet Muhammad's prayers, too. This focus on communal peace was central to his teachings.
Wow, so it's woven into the very language and rituals of the faith.
Precisely. But it goes even deeper than that. The Quran also stresses the importance of genuine love and respect between Muslims. It's not just about coexisting peacefully. It's about having genuine care and concern for one another.
It sounds a lot like the concept of ummah, the idea of a global Muslim community bound by shared beliefs and values.
You got it. And there's this beautiful hadith from the Prophet Muhammad that really captures this. He said, "O Muslims, you will never enter paradise unless you are believers. And you will never achieve genuine belief unless you love and respect each other. Shall I tell you the way you can create love amongst yourselves? that way lies in frequently greeting each other with salam.
It's such a powerful message, isn't it? It's a reminder that peace really does start with our relationships, with how we treat one another. It makes you think about how these principles might compare to the social structures in other societies. But maybe that's a good place to pause for now.
Yeah, we can pick up there in our next segment. Okay, so we've established that Islam really emphasizes peace on a personal level within society, but what about the rest of the world? Like, how does Islam approach global peace? Is that even realistic?
It's a huge question, right? It feels like the world is constantly on edge, like one conflict after another. But Dr. Ahmad, he actually lays out this two-pronged approach in his book. He says Islam has both a short-term and a long-term plan for achieving world peace.
Two-pronged approach.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating concept. So the short-term plan, as Dr. Ahmad explains it, revolves around the idea of everyone submitting to the will of Allah. So essentially, achieving world peace through a shared belief system.
So is he saying that everyone needs to convert to Islam?
That's the core idea, yeah. Dr. Ahmad's argument is that if humanity was united under the same fundamental beliefs and values, then a lot of the conflicts that stem from different ideologies, they would just naturally kind of fade away.
I can see how that makes sense,
Hmm.
in theory, but I'm sure some people would push back on that, right? Like, what about the diversity of cultures and beliefs that we have around the world?
That's where that long-term plan comes in. And it's rooted in this beautiful concept of Tawheed.
Tawheed, the oneness of God.
Right. So I'm familiar with the term, but I'm curious to hear how Dr. Ahmad connects that to world peace. How does that work?
Well, he explains that recognizing this oneness of God, it allows us to see past all these artificial barriers we've put up between each other, like race or color or creed. It underscores the idea that we all come from the same source, that we're all bound by this principle of universal brotherhood.
Okay, I love that. That really resonates with me, this idea of universal brotherhood, especially in a world that feels, honestly, so divided right now.
Exactly. And Dr. Ahmad uses this really powerful image from the Quran to illustrate this. It's the story of humanity's origins. He reminds us that we all descended from Adam and Eve. You know, we're all branches on the same family tree, so to speak.
It's amazing how just a simple reminder like that can really shift your perspective.
Right. And Dr. Ahmad, he brings it to life, too, with some really incredible examples from Islamic history. He talks about Omar ibn al-Khattab, one of the early caliphs, who addressed a former slave as Sayyidina, which translates to our master.
Wait, what?
I know, right? Can you imagine a leader today addressing a former subordinate as our master? It completely flips the power dynamic on its head.
That's such a striking example of equality.
Absolutely. But it's not just historical anecdotes either. Dr. Ahmad also talks about the experience of Malcolm X during the Hajj, his pilgrimage to Mecca.
Oh, yeah.
Malcolm X, who obviously had very strong views on racial segregation, he was so moved by the racial harmony that he saw among Muslims from all over the world, from every background imaginable, that it actually led him to reevaluate some of his own beliefs.
Wow. It just shows you the power of actually experiencing these Islamic principles in action. So does Islam, historically speaking, does it have a good track record when it comes to racial tolerance?
That's a great question. And Dr. Ahmad, he addresses it directly in the book. He argues that historically, Islam actually has one of the best records of racial tolerance, because it vehemently rejects any kind of discrimination based on race or ethnicity.
This is all sounding really hopeful, but we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room, right? The world is far from peaceful. Even within the Muslim community itself, there's a lot of conflict. So how does Dr. Ahmad reconcile that reality with his vision of Islam as a path to peace?
Yeah, you're right. And that's a crucial point that he doesn't shy away from. He recognizes that there are challenges and conflicts, both within the Muslim world and globally. But his main argument is that achieving true peace, both in the short term and the long term, hinges on people, individuals, and societies making a real effort to embrace the teachings of Islam and really translate them into action. It's not passive. It's not going to just happen on its own.
So it's not enough to just understand the concepts. We have to actually live them out in our lives.
Exactly. He's calling for a conscious effort to make sure our actions are lining up with what the Quran teaches about peace and justice and universal brotherhood.
That makes sense. But it also feels kind of daunting. Where do we even begin?
And that's a question we can explore in our next segment. But for now, what are your initial thoughts on this whole two-pronged approach to world peace? Does Dr. Ahmad's vision resonate with you at all?
Okay, so we've talked about Dr. Ahmad's argument that Islam offers a path to peace,
Yeah.
from personal growth all the way to global harmony. But it seems like it all comes down to like really living those teachings,
Like
right?
putting it into practice. And that's where it gets tricky, because it's one thing to talk about these big, beautiful ideas, but how do we actually make them real, especially in a world that feels so focused on like conflict and self-interest?
Exactly. It's easy to get overwhelmed. So what does that look like? How do people and societies actually live these principles of peace, like in a real tangible way?
Well, the thing is, Dr. Ahmad doesn't give us a simple answer, like a step-by-step guide, which I actually kind of appreciate.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
because instead he emphasizes this idea of constant effort, like this ongoing struggle to align our actions with what the Quran teaches. It's about self-reflection and education and building community. It's a process.
It sounds like it's more of a journey than a destination.
Exactly. It's a lifelong thing. And there's this real sense of humility in Dr. Ahmad's approach. Like, he recognizes that achieving peace, whether it's within ourselves or on a global scale, takes continuous work, both individually and collectively. It's not about reaching some endpoint. It's about constantly striving, moving in the direction of a more just and peaceful world.
That's inspiring, but also, I gotta admit, kind of intimidating, because it really makes you realize like we all have a responsibility to be part of that effort.
Yeah, it does. But it also shows the power of like even small actions, like small acts of kindness and compassion and understanding. Those things can ripple outwards, and contribute to a more harmonious society.
That actually reminds me of something Dr. Ahmad talks about in the book, focusing on our own spheres of influence.
Oh, right.
Yeah, he says we don't have to solve all the world's problems, but we can start by making peace within ourselves and within our own communities, like right here, right now.
Yes. He's a big believer in that. Building strong, just, compassionate communities. He sees that as the foundation for a more peaceful world. Like, it's about creating those spaces where dialogue and empathy can actually happen.
So it's about both personal and social change working together.
Exactly. They're interconnected.
Mhm.
Like, our personal peace is what allows us to have peaceful relationships, which then helps to create a more peaceful society. And as those peaceful societies start to connect and collaborate, well, that's how you start to build a more peaceful world. It's a long road, for sure. But I think Dr. Maude offers a really hopeful vision of what's possible.
I agree. It's been a really thought-provoking deep dive into the Quran and world peace. It's definitely challenged me to like really think about what peace means
Yeah.
on all those different levels and how I can play a role in creating it.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff. If anyone's interested in learning more, I highly recommend checking out the book. Dr. Ahmad's insights are like, well, they're really worth exploring.
Absolutely. And as you reflect on everything we've talked about today, I want you to consider this. What does peace mean to you personally? How do you experience it in your own life? And how can you contribute to it in your relationships, your community, the world around you?
Those are big questions.
They are, but they're worth asking. So thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Keep seeking, keep learning, and keep striving for a more peaceful world. Until next time.